Hi folks, we occasionally receive support questions asking how to improve the render speed of models that are rendering unreasonably slow. Now, render speed is chiefly determined by the speed of your computer's CPU, the resolution of the image, and the complexity of the model and lighting. But for the most part, Podium renders should take anywhere from a few minutes up to a few hours for your high-quality images using the high-quality presets. Now, occasionally we do see cases that are way outside of those expected ranges. So for the model on screen now, the SU Podium Render Manager was estimating over a day for Podium to finish rendering calculations. And the user emailed us asking whether or not that was a normal time frame. And the answer is that no, it's not. If you see something like that, where the estimate is in days instead of minutes or hours, that's not normal behavior for Podium. That's usually an indication that there's some specific bottleneck in the model that's slowing things down to a crawl. Alright, so if this happens, the first thing you want to do is run the Analyze tool, and that's the wrench icon up here in the SU Podium toolbar. So when I press this button, it's going to take a few seconds and analyze the model, and then generate a list of statistics about the scene, including info about our light sources and materials. It's also going to alert us about potential problems in the model, but as you can see down here in the alert section, there's actually nothing listed, so that's a great sign. In this case, the most concerning thing for me in terms of render speed is the high number of point lights and spotlights. So our troubleshooting plan for this model is to first turn off all the omni-lights and spotlights, then we're going to remove the refractive materials, then we're going to remove the light-emitting materials, and as a last resort, we'll remove all the remaining Podium material properties from the model. After that, if it's still rendering slowly, we'll need to take a close look at the model and see if we can find any abnormalities. Now, we're going to do this all incrementally so that we can pinpoint exactly where the problem is stemming from. So the first thing I'm going to do is close this Analyze window, and we'll go ahead and toggle off all the artificial lights. Alright, so Podium provides a really easy way to do this. To turn off our point lights and spotlights, we just go to Extensions, SU Podium version 2.6, Tools, and then here in the Tools menu, there's a Toggle Point Lights and Toggle Spotlights option. And what this does is just reverses the current state of all the point lights in the model. So let me click Toggle Point Lights. It's going to say 25 of 25 point lights are on, turn them off, and I say yes. That Analyze window is going to pop up again, telling us that all the point lights are turned off, and then I'll just go ahead and do that for the spotlights as well. Yes. Okay, so now we have all 51 artificial light sources turned off. Now, unfortunately, turning off the omni-lights and spotlights did not solve the problem with unreasonably slow rendering in this model, but I do want to justify that decision and sort of explain why I think we're better off with all those omni and spotlights turned off anyway. So the first thing is the nature of this model. If we go out to this east-north view, you can see there's a huge floor-to-ceiling window wall on this side of the model, and then the same thing is repeated on this side. So pretty much no matter what time of day it is, we should be getting a ton of sunlight in this interior space. Let me go back to the ground level interior. And you can see if we turn those SketchUp sun and shadows on, tons of light is actually coming in through those windows, and that'll appear at render time. As long as we have sun and shadows turned on, we're probably going to get plenty of illumination in this room. So instead of relying on that sunlight, which is actually the most computationally efficient way to light a scene in SU Podium, what the user was doing was placing arbitrary light sources up here toward the ceiling. So if we look around up here, I've got some of these spotlights selected. They're not associated with any light fixtures in particular. These are just spotlights floating near the ceiling, aimed down, and their sole purpose is to illuminate the space and brighten the room. But as I said before, because we have such prominent window features in this model, we just don't need to rely on arbitrary light sources like that. We don't actually need fill lighting because we have so much sunlight. So it's much better and much faster for Podium to just turn off the artificial lights and rely on the sun whenever you can. There is one final reason that I want to talk about, and this has to do with organizing your artificial light sources in a way that makes sense for the layout of the model. So let me go back to this east-north view. You can see this is a 3-story structure. The ground floor and the first level are connected by an open atrium, so that's a shared space, and it would make sense for, if there were light fixtures on the ceiling, it would make sense for them to be turned on even when we're rendering from the ground level. But This third floor area is divided from that atrium space by a floor. So any lights that are turned on in this space have absolutely no bearing on what's happening down here in this space below. So what you would want to do, and this isn't something that the user did, but I just want to mention it, you should organize your artificial lights onto SketchUp layers or tags, right? So I would create 2 new layers, and I would say atrium lights and third level lights. And so when we're rendering from the ground level interior, any lights that I have on the third level, I can just hide so that the render engine doesn't see them. If we leave those turned on, Podium doesn't know better. It's just going to calculate the lighting for any light fixtures, Omni and spotlights that are turned on in your model. Even if they're completely out of the camera view, that's still going to add to the render time. So that's just an FYI. If you have a model that's divided up into closed spaces, only turn on artificial lights for the room that you're currently rendering. And that should save you a lot of render time for complex SketchUp models that have a lot of different rooms. Alright, so disabling the Omni lights and spotlights did not solve our issues with unreasonably slow rendering, so the next troubleshooting step that we discussed was to start disabling certain SU Podium material properties. And to do that, we go to Extensions, SU Podium version 2.6, Tools, Reset Materials, and that opens a convenient dialog that lets you remove certain material properties from the entire model. So this Reset Materials function is irreversible, meaning once I do it, there's no easy way to add those material properties back. And it isn't our goal to remove the materials from this model permanently. We're only doing this to troubleshoot the render speed and figure out exactly where the bottleneck is. So before you use the Reset Materials dialog, what you should do is save a backup of your scene. So I would just go to Save As, and I would probably just give it a suffix, something like materials removed, and resave it. So now when I go ahead and incrementally remove material properties from this model, we're going to be able to pinpoint what the issue is, but then we can always go back to our master file and make changes as necessary once we know exactly what to remove, and we don't have to add all the materials back manually. So the first point of concern for me was the refraction properties that were in the model. Refraction is not an issue in and of itself, and you should use it if you need it, but it can cause SU Podium to slow down in some cases. So because we're troubleshooting render time, it makes sense that our first step would be to remove refraction. Then I would click OK, and then create a test render to see if that helped the render time at all. We don't want to remove all the material properties at once. We want to do this step by step so we can pinpoint exactly where the problem is. So in the case of this model, after I removed refraction, the render speed was not improved. So I moved on to LEMs. Now, just like refraction, there's nothing inherently wrong with LEMs, and in fact, light-emitting materials are my preferred method of artificial lighting with SU Podium. But the point of this video is to teach you how to be methodical when you're troubleshooting render time. So the next step for me was to remove all LEMs and all hidden LEMs, click OK, and then create another test render. And unfortunately, this still didn't improve render speed for this model. So the next step could be to remove blur and bump, but I'm not going to spend time removing those two material parameters individually. Blur and bump are not functions that would ever cause a drastic increase in render speed, as far as I've seen in all my experience with SU Podium. Bump maps and blurred reflections just wouldn't cause the render speed to increase from 2 hours all the way up to 26 hours or 48 hours or something like that. So the next step for me was remove all after removing the hidden LEMs. So what we're essentially targeting with the remove all feature, we're removing all of the SU Podium material properties in the scene, but the only thing that's left is basically plain old reflection. And once I selected the remove all option, clicked OK, and created a new test render, there was finally a dramatic increase in render speed. Render speed went from basically frozen at 24 plus hours, all the way down to 9 minutes. So let me show you the reason why. All right, so by incrementally removing the SU Podium material properties, we eventually determined that it was plain old reflection that was causing the render to slow down. Now, the main reflective surface in this model is all of the windows. As I showed you before, there are quite a few windows in this model. We have this entire glass wall on this side, and the same thing repeated on the other side. But of course, windows and glass are a common feature in architectural rendering, and most of the time this doesn't cause any problems. Almost every architectural model that we work on has windows and glass, and that doesn't cause the render time to increase from a few minutes up to 24 hours. So there must be something unusual about the glass in this specific model. So by taking a close look at these windows, what I determined was every single window in this model uses thick 2-layer glass. So instead of a single SketchUp plane being placed across these window openings, we actually have two faces, one on the outside and one on the inside. And as you probably know, SketchUp faces have both a front face and a back face. So if we take a look at the materials on these glass windows, you can see we have two different materials on the front and back faces. So on the outside of the glass window, we have this final glass, which is 22% diffuse, 77% transparent, and 1% reflective. And then on the inside of these windows, we have a different material, which is also reflective, 35% diffuse, 60% transparent, and 4% reflective. And it's these internal reflections on the inside of these glass windows that's really causing SU Podium to slow down. So when light enters this room, if you think about it, coming through this entryway here, it's coming through an outer glass door and then an inner glass door. So it's passing through not 2 planes, but 4 planes. And each plane has reflections on both the outside and the inside of these glass windows. So that right there is the key to this entire video. The thick glass is what's causing SU Podium to slow down. Now, I of course understand the justification for creating a SketchUp model that has thick 2-layer glass. Glass in the real world does have some volume, so it follows that it would make sense to model your SketchUp scene that way. However, in terms of rendering, we don't need those 2 glass faces. All you really need is a single SketchUp plane placed across your window and door openings, and it's going to look just fine in the render, and it will render much, much faster. So unfortunately, none of the windows and doors in this model are SketchUp components, so it would just take too much time to edit all of these glass faces individually and remove the second layer of glass. So really all we need to do is remove the reflection properties from the outside and the inside of these glass faces. But remember, we don't want to remove all of the other material properties that we already got rid of. So what we're going to do is go back to the master copy of this. I'm going to go to File, Open, and I have the original version before we started taking things away. All right, so I'm back in the original copy, and now all we need to do is remove the reflection from this glass. So we go in here and take the reflection down to 0. This actually should add up to 100%. So we're going to go with just 25 and 75 is good. Click Apply. Remember, we need to get that interface as well. And I'm going to go with the same values that we have on the outside. 25, 75, no reflection. Click Apply. So now we have these glass faces with no reflection, no refraction, and everything should render much faster. So let's go ahead and finish this off. Going back to the ground level interior scene, I want to turn SketchUp Sun and Shadows on because, again, that's where we're getting most of our light. I'm just going to move the slider so we have some nice sunlight coming in through these windows. We're going to go into the SU Podium Options dialog. I do think the Interior Bright High would be the best preset for this, but for a quick demonstration, I'm just going to use Interior Bright Default so it renders faster. I don't need a transparent background. Viewport resolution is just fine for now. And we'll just stick with the default SketchUp sky. So click Save, click Render, and I'll show you what that looks like in just a second. All right, so here's the result. The image took 15 minutes and 50 seconds to render, and it looks pretty good. We've got plenty of light, as I said. Coming in through those windows, we have this nice sunlight hitting the wall and floor here. I did leave the LEMs turned on and these light fixtures over the entryway, but it's clear that we didn't really need all those 51 Omni lights and spotlights to add light to this scene. From this point, if we wanted it to be a little bit brighter, we could either use the Podium image editor function and just brighten it and play with the contrast and adjust the result that we already have, or if necessary, we could add 1 or 2 hidden LEMs, maybe on the mezzanine floor or behind the camera. But the point is, we don't need all of those extra lights, and the second major takeaway from this video is that you really do not need 2-layer glass for your windows and doors. If you have any questions about how to set up windows and doors for rendering with Podium, just take a look at Podium Browser. Open the Podium Browser, give that a second here, just type window, and then just download one of these windows directly in your model and take a close look at how it's constructed. So by looking closely at the Podium Browser components, you can learn a lot about how Podium works and how you should be making your custom components. So looking at the glass, it's just a single piece of SketchUp geometry. We're not using any thick 2-layer glass. And if we grab the eyedropper here and look at the material, it's 74% transparent, 26% reflection, and no refraction on it. All right, so I hope all of that gives you some ideas about how to methodically troubleshoot a problematic model. What you want to do is incrementally remove potential roadblocks until you find out exactly what the issue was, and then you can go back to your original file, fix the problem, and produce renders within a reasonable time frame. So in this case, as soon as we moved those internal reflections from the 2-layer glass, we were able to produce a test render in only 15 minutes as opposed to 24 plus hours. All right, I will summarize the contents of this video beneath the video on the webpage, and if you have any questions, feel free to let us know through support or on the SU Podium forums, and I'll see you guys in the next video. All right, thanks.